Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I'm your host, Dr. Brad, and I am joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim and Tracy. And Tracy, great to have you back. We've missed you these past few weeks.
Nice.
We're all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine skydiving, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you're now listening to the cure for these ailments. Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after each episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors. But we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. Now, before we jump to science news, I just want to give a shout out to baby Trump, who's in the background trying to tweet and shout at the same time. I'm sure that is exactly what he's trying to do right now. And all I can say is start playing your theme song, Trump. It's by NSYNC. It's called Bye Bye Bye.
Yeah. Or you're fired.
Wow.
So all we're waiting for is
Wow.
somebody to cut those
I'm done.
strings, and off he's gonna go.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, we will now move on to our science news segment. And remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. Now, this week, we turn our attention to ecology-related science news. And being in an agriculturally dominated area, two of us are from Nebraska, one's from Arkansas, and so all in agricultural areas. Today, we're going to focus on the key nutrient for plants and animals, nitrogen. Now, most of us, I am sure, had in our earth science classes a discussion of the nitrogen cycle. However, I do not think any of us envisioned part of this cycle occurring in the Antarctic Sea. Tim has the story. So, Tim, how is nitrogen being fixed at sub-zero temperatures?
Okay, thanks for the introduction, Dr. Brad. And yes, we'll be talking about nitrogen in aquatic ecosystems. But before we get into today's science article, we need to I want to step into the science classroom just for a couple minutes and just to do a little discussion to help remind us about the nitrogen cycle. Now, I'm sure we all know, or hopefully you all know that, life is organic, and it's been, said or estimated that 98 to 99% of the compounds found in living organisms are organic, which the remaining are, 1 to 2% then are inorganic or inorganic ions, which are also very important. When we look at the most abundant elements found in living organisms, we're talking about chunks. It's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So our focus, though, is going to be on how important nitrogen and the nitrogen cycle is to all life forms. And recall that nitrogen is found in inorganic macromolecules, proteins and nucleic acids, RNA, DNA. So how does the nitrogen cycle end up within organic compounds? So I'm going to go to figure here. Let me share that. Share the nitrogen cycle. And, okay, so the as I'm sure most of you, hopefully all of you know, the major reservoir for nitrogen is the atmosphere, as a gas in the atmosphere. But most organisms cannot use the nitrogen cycle. I'm sorry, cannot use nitrogen gas, and plants can only use nitrogen that has been fixed into what we call a fixed form. In other words, incorporated in compounds such as nitrates, nitrate ions, and ammonia. And then animals, of course, animals are getting their nitrogen from eating plants and eating animals that have eaten plants. And of course, we're an animal too, so we fall right into that. We get our nitrogen sources. Even though we do make, there are some nitrogen compounds that we make, but there are some that we get those nitrogen sources to make those compounds from eating plants and eating other organisms. In the nitrogen cycle, we're kind of really looking at 4 processes. First, you have nitrogen fixation, where atmospheric nitrogen atmospheric nitrogen, by lightning forming nitrogen oxides, dissolves in rain and forms nitrates that are carried to the earth. But most of it's the biological fixation by bacteria. And bacteria by themselves or bacteria in symbiotic relationship with plants, where they're extremely important in taking nitrogen and fixing it into sources that can then be used by plants. And so a major part of this cycle, I guess pictures are kind of in the way here, but of course, the nitrogen fixing the root nodules in the legume plants, where they're able to, again, fix nitrogen into nitrates or ammonia. Then you have those bacteria in the soil and cyanobacteria in the soil that fix nitrogen into ammonia. And then you have those nitrifying bacteria that convert it then into nitrates into nitrates, which then is picked up by plants. And as you can see, ammonia is also being picked up by plants. And then, of course, animals and humans are getting our nitrogen sources by consuming nitrogen that has been fixed by bacteria. So we're very dependent on bacteria to do this vital process of getting nitrogen into a form that we can use. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of here, back to my story here. So the reason for the biology lesson today is because my science story centers on nitrogen fixation, in particular nitrogen fixation in aquatic ecosystems. My story comes from The Scientist on October 28th by Shauna Williams, titled Nitrogen Fixing Microbes Found in Antarctic Sea. As we saw in the nitrogen cycle, most life forms are dependent on nitrogen fixing bacteria, collectively called diazotrophs, for nitrogen and photosynthetic organisms to put the nitrogen into a usable form. Nitrogen fixation is really energy expensive because it necessitates breaking the triple bond of nitrogen gas. Deborah Bronk, a chemical oceanographer who leads the Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Science in Maine, discussed that it was long assumed that in the ocean, only warmer realms could harbor diazotrophs, and that microbes in cooler regions would need to scavenge previously fixed nitrogen from molecules in the water. It's not clear why scientists stopped this, said Bronk, who a few years ago searched the literature for the origins of this idea. Quote, "I couldn't find the basis for why it was so entrenched," she says. In 2012, however, Connie Lovejoy, a microbiology ecologist at Laval University in Quebec, and her colleagues reported that Arctic seas are in fact home to diazotrophs, And since then, Bronx Group and others have reached the same conclusion. In a study published October 26 in Nature Geoscience, a Japan-based research team found diazotrophs at work in the Antarctic too, specifically in the waters near sea ice. The study came about when senior author Naomi Harada, a geochemist at the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, was put in charge of the Antarctic research expedition. Co-authored Takahui Shiozaki, which I'm probably butchering, writes in an email to the scientists, marine biologist, and Shiozaki is a marine biologist who worked with Hadra at the time and is now at the University of Tokyo, went along on the voyage and collected ocean water samples at 21 spots in the open ocean and close to the coast. The study team extracted DNA and RNA from microbes in the samples and looked for the gene for the nitrogen-fixing enzyme nitrogenase. They identified some of the microbial species present and tested directly whether the cells in each of the samples were fixing nitrogen and at what rates. Quote, we found substantial nitrogen fixation near the Antarctic coast, especially around ice-covered regions. Quote, sea ice contains high levels of iron, which may be involved in the Antarctic nitrogen fixation. Nitrogenase needs iron to fix nitrogen, and unlike in the Arctic, there's little iron available in the sea around Antarctica. In addition, concentrations of compounds containing fixed nitrogen are high in those waters, which would seem to mean that being able to fix their own nitrogen wouldn't give diazotrophs much of a competitive advantage over non-diazotrophs. Bronk, who was not involved in the study, says it's surprising that nitrogen fixation occurs in the Antarctic seas, given the conditions of low iron and high availability of already fixed nitrogen in the form of nitrate. And she agrees that the iron locked in sea ice is likely part of the explanation. There's little iron present in Antarctica winds, she notes, but over long periods of time, it's going to accumulate in a fair bit in dust in that ice. And if you melt the ice, then over the course of a decade, it's releasing iron into the ocean much quicker than it would come from the air. But that still doesn't explain why microbes would fix nitrogen when there's plenty of nitrate around, she adds. Lovejoy, who also was not involved in the study, says it's not unexpected that there is some diazotroph presence in the Antarctic waters. Quote, I think it's just a matter of maintaining some sort of diversity in the ocean, that you'll always have a residual number of organisms that still have the gene and are able to fix nitrogen. But as to whether they use the ability under a given set of conditions, it's always been a little bit of a debate as to what drives nitrogen fixation in general. And that's true in both freshwater and marine ecosystems. So the finding that nitrogen fixation occurs at the bottom of the globe is notable, but Sukizaki is more struck by who's doing the fixation. The most surprising thing is that the cyanobacteria, in particular the cyanobacteria UCYNA, was the major diazotroph. And that microbe has previously been found in tropical and subtropical waters, as well as the Arctic Ocean. This means that UCYNA-A is distributed all over the world from tropics to polar regions. Lovejoy likewise finds this to be the study's most surprising find. Microbes that are able to live in both temperate oceans and polar regions are very, very rare, she says. In future studies, we need to investigate why the UCYN-A is able to thrive in such a wide range of temperature and what limits their nitrogen fixation. This will allow us to predict how ocean nitrogen fixation will change with climate change. So, Dr. Brad and Tracy, what do you think of this interesting discovery?
It's interesting.
Yeah, that's something that's always kind of puzzled me too. Exactly how nitrogen fixation benefits the organisms doing the fixation.
Right.
I think so, there's been some hypotheses put forward. One is that, of course, when oxygen first started to appear in the atmosphere, it was a toxin. It was toxic to the majority of organisms. Well, in essence, to all organisms,
right.
Except those that were actually making the oxygen. Because, of course, life had developed in anaerobic conditions, not aerobic conditions. And so one route of getting rid of it or making the oxygen non-toxic to an organism would be to fix it in some form.
Yeah.
So making it a nitrate or nitrite would knock down the toxicity of the oxygen. So that's probably the best explanation I've heard for why that would be the case. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard that, Tim, or if you. I was thinking that nitrogen fixation was also an endpoint for electron transfer in bacteria. I don't remember my bacterial physiology well enough. If that's the case in those organisms.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't recall, and I've go through that enough that I just don't. There are some that. Yeah, there are some that. Okay, yeah. So there are those that are anaerobic that can do all three steps of glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport, and not use oxygen. And so they'll use they actually use a polyatomic ion. It could be a carbonate or nitrate. So they can use that to do all three steps of aerobic cell respiration and make that 36 to 38 ATP that the aerobic organisms are doing. So yeah, that really would make sense. Is that they I think probably both things, where they were trying to get rid of that oxygen because they would have been obligate anaerobes, and oxygen, like I said, oxygen would have been toxic to those bacteria during that time. And then you had those that evolved to be able to use that polyatomic ion, nitrogen containing polyatomic ion, to start making tons of ATP, where they wouldn't have been before, or maybe, I can envision that definitely.
So between those two aspects, that would, that's a pretty good explanation of why, reasonable explanations of why these processes exist in those organisms.
Right.
So definitely. And then, so have they tried to look at rates of fixation in the Antarctic microbes? If they tried to do that?
They mentioned that that's one thing they were going to look at, but I never saw any information about what the rates were.
Because you'd certainly suspect that it's going to be slower at those temperatures, just simply because diffusion would be slower.
Right. Just the enzyme
for
kinetics.
No other reason.
Molecular motion, slower.
Right.
Yeah.
You can obviously have cold adapted enzymes, which they have to have, and that's something that I think is always interesting. Compare the structure of enzymes from different organisms that from organisms that grow at different temperatures. What I'm trying to spit out.
Right.
So yeah, that'll be interesting to look at also.
And it would make sense if those, I guess, they are, especially those cyanobacteria that are using that nitrogen fixing, that maybe they are using that to do again that all three steps of an anaerobic, I wouldn't call it anaerobic cell respiration because it's not using oxygen, but instead of trying to bring in the source from their environment, they just make it and have it maybe available at a quicker rate to do the cell respiration with. But that would be interesting to look at that too. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, they're using all those nitrogen compounds to make their amino acids, as photosynthetic organisms do, to make amino acids and other things they need, nitrogen source.
Sure, nucleic acids.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. It's very, very clear that those processes are needed. All right. Well, I think we'll go ahead and take our first break. So we'll be right back with more Sounds Reasonable.
All alive. The devil's in the detail, lingered inside. Oh, a holy crime. But how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence. I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters. Everything that brought me alive. But we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence without an alibi.
There we go.
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable on this post-election Sunday, November 8th, 2020. Well, as I just mentioned, of course, we just had the presidential election this past Tuesday. And taking a look at the individuals that voted for Trump, we have to admit that he gathered a lot of votes. No way to deny that, obviously. Around 70 million plus votes were received by Trump. Fortunately, Biden had nearly 75 million. Now, exactly who comprises Trump's base? And that we're going to take a little bit of a look at that here with our next story. Obviously, white evangelical voters are estimated to constitute a little more than half of Trump's support. So what issues are these voters concerned about that would make them vote for such a deplorable person as Trump? Tracy has investigated this. So Tracy, what pulls the typical evangelist trigger?
Yes, I found a poll that was taken about 3 weeks ago by the Religious News Service. The story I found on religiousnews.com. The article was entitled "Poll: White evangelicals are religious outliers on every issue of concern to voters." Only 35% of white evangelicals said the coronavirus is of critical concern, according to PRRI's 11th annual American Values Survey. Among this group, abortion and terrorism top the list of concerns. Someday you guys are going to buy me a new computer, a really fast one. And this was taken obviously before the election, so I'm going to read it just as it is. As they head to the polls, nearly all religious Americans say the coronavirus is the most critical issue facing the country. The study showed, but there's one notable exception: white evangelicals. Only 35% of white evangelicals said the coronavirus is a critical concern. And the study was released October 19th. Among this group, abortion and terrorism topped the list of critical concerns. No other religious group identified abortion among its top 3 concerns. That's a little different. On this and other issues, white evangelicals are outliers among U.S. religious groups. White evangelical Protestants do seem to be out on a limb on their policy views and views of Trump, said Natalie Jackson, PRRI's Director of Research. It's more of a fact of other types of Christians, mainline Protestants and Catholics, shifting away toward a more centrist outlook and increasingly leaving white evangelicals out on their own as one of the religious group that very much supports Trump and is locked in with their party ID. The study, conducted in September among 2,538 U.S. adults, showed that overall 35% of Americans approve of how President Donald Trump has handled the coronavirus pandemic, while 65% disapprove. But white evangelicals approve of the job Trump is doing at a rate of 76%, as compared to 52% of white mainline Protestants and 49% of white Catholics. Heading into the 2020 election, their support for the president remains steadfast. Majorities of every other religious group say the president has damaged the dignity of the office of the president, but only 36% of white evangelicals believe that. And among white evangelicals who identify as Republicans, only 20% say he's damaged the dignity of the office. White evangelicals are also the only major religious group to say the country is moving in the right direction, with 59% agreeing. By comparison, only 40% of mainline Protestants, 39% of white Catholics, 40% of Hispanic Protestants, and 28% of Hispanic Catholics said the country is headed in the right direction. That assessment drops even further among non-Christian and unaffiliated Americans. Only 24% of non-Christian religious Americans and 18% of religiously unaffiliated Americans say the country is headed in the right direction. The one area where religious groups appeared to agree was regarding Trump's behavior in comparison with his predecessors. A majority of white evangelicals, 55%, said they wish Trump behaved more like his predecessors, compared to 66% each of white mainline Protestants and their white Catholics, not their white Catholics, and white Catholics, and 67% of Hispanic Protestants. 71% of Hispanic Catholics and non-Christian religious Americans wish Trump's behavior was more in line with his predecessors. On other issues, such as whether God has granted the U.S. a special role in history, and divisions surface once again. A strong majority, 71% of white evangelicals, said the U.S. plays a special role, more than any other religious group. Only 35% of white Catholics, 32% of white mainline Protestants, and 15% of religiously unaffiliated Americans agree with the statement about the U.S.'s special role. But even among evangelicals, there was a notable decline in support for the statement from 4 years ago, when 82% of evangelicals said the same. The survey also found there were no religious groups in which a majority agreed the U.S. sets a good moral example for the world. Only 33% of white Catholics, 29% of white mainline Protestants, and 28% of white evangelicals agreed. Black Protestants, 14%, and religiously unaffiliated Americans, 10%, were even less likely to agree America sets a good moral example. The margin of error for the survey was plus or minus 2.6% points at the 95% level of confidence. What do you guys think about that?
It's surprising. I mean, how high I guess it is, but and I'm trying to, I'm as you're going through there, I'm trying to think, well, why? Why is it? Is it just because his believe that he is in line with their beliefs, which I don't think he is, but in reality, or is it like the cult? I mean, is that what it is? More of the cult type of behavior?
I noticed that a lot of people who were undecided just sort of lean toward, well, you know what, I'm going to vote for whoever best represents my religious beliefs, whether he practices it or not. If he believes it, if he says he believes what I believe, that's who I'm voting for. I came across that a lot.
Yeah, I think the major issue is what he's done with the Supreme Court and federal judges in general. They've been willing to overlook basically everything in exchange for that.
Yeah.
Of course, and why would that be? I mean, because they've been anti-abortion from the get-go.
Right.
So they've been waiting 50 some years for this opportunity, and now they've got it, and they could care less, I think, about anything else.
Right.
Because again, when you have the worldview that around, it's an astounding percent, but around 50% of this group believes that the world will end in their lifetime. Now it's tough to have it's tough to put together a national policy that should, quite frankly, have at least 100-year strategy, if not more. When you've got 50% of this group thinking that the world's going to end in their lifetime. Yeah, so it's all about the here and now, and not worrying about anything in the future. So that to me says pretty much sums up this group. And shall I say it one more time? Religious beliefs have consequences, and that's exactly what we've been living through. That's why they don't care about climate change. Is why worry about it? The Earth's ending. The world is going to end before it'll really be an issue anyway. Is how they view it.
That's another good thing about Biden becoming president, is a lot of the Republicans really want to recognize climate change, and Donald Trump has been kind of pulling some of those restrictions away, and they really do kind of want to put some of those back. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah,
Speaking of climate change.
Yeah, exactly. Biden's already announced that we're going to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement.
Yeah.
So that's, of course, very good news. And he's actually appointing scientists to run the the environmental organizations again. So that's all good news. So we won't have coal barons running the EPA.
Right. Yeah, and of course you said the same thing as far as with the COVID, getting, listening to scientists and getting the back in with the World Health Organization and all those, reversing all those things right away.
Oh, I feel so much better. Feel so much better all the way around.
Yep, I mean it is. It's like I said, this wasn't just a U.S. election. This was a world election. I mean the world's fate literally lied on the results of this election, in my view.
Absolutely.
And Biden received congratulations from just about every world leader out there, except Putin didn't congratulate him. And I don't think President Xi from China did either. Or the lead, the Ayatollah didn't give him a call either from Iran. And I guess we can't leave out Kim Jong-un.
No.
Didn't give him a call either.
Forget about it.
I don't think I'm ever going to be allowed to go to a family reunion again, you guys, ever.
So
I think I might be okay with that.
You're the black sheep. You're the black sheep of the family.
I think I'm fine with that right now.
Yeah, I mean,
Here, and what's going to happen is that, as always, they'll find out that all this fear that they have, that all these things that are going to happen do not happen. You see that every time, with the Democratic election or somebody with the Democratic, that they have all these fears that are being perpetuated that never come to fruition. As far as taking away your guns or raising your taxes, all those types of things. So maybe they'll realize that all that was BS that was being spewed. And
I don't know. I asked my aunt last night. I was like, "Well, what about when Obama took your guns?" Said, "Well, he talked about it, but he never put it into effect."
Talked about it.
I said, "Well, why not?" And she said, "You'll have to ask him."
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll have to remember to use that one. That's good. All right, Tracy, thanks so much for that story, and we'll be right back with more Sounds Reasonable.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget, but you're breaking down my walls again just to set me free. Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling?
And we're back after our break. Something that is easy to forget amongst the COVID-19 pandemic, as we were just discussing, is the issue of climate change. Now, climate change, believe it or not, is more central to our survival than is coronavirus or any other infectious disease that we currently know. But of course, Donald, quote unquote, science guy, Trump, is doing his best to not only ignore this fact, but add to the problem. The story I'm going to relay today comes from the New York Times, October 27th of this year. It was authored by Christopher Flavell and Lisa Friedman and is titled, "As Election Nears," and of course, this is a story prior to the election. As election nears, Trump makes a final push against climate science. The Trump administration has recently removed the chief scientist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, the nation's premier scientific agency, installed new political staff who have questioned accepted facts about climate change and imposed stricter controls on communications at the agency. The moves threaten to stifle a major source of objective United States government information about climate change that underpins federal rules on greenhouse gas emissions and offer an indication of the direction the agency will take if President Trump wins re-election. But fortunately, we no longer have to worry about that. An early sign of the shift came last month when Eric Noble, the former White House policy advisor, who had just been appointed as chief of staff, removed Craig McLean, the agency's acting chief scientist. Dr. McLean had sent some of the new political appointees a message that asked them to acknowledge the agency's scientific integrity policy, which prohibits manipulating research or presenting ideologically driven findings. The request prompted a sharp response from Dr. Noble. "Respectfully, by what authority are you sending this to me?" he wrote, according to a person who received a copy of the exchange after it was circulated within NOAA. I mean, the last thing we would want out of NOAA would be scientific integrity, after all.
Right.
Mr. McLean answered that his role as acting chief scientist made him responsible for ensuring that the agency's rules on scientific integrity were followed. The following morning, Dr. Noble responded, "You no longer serve as the acting chief scientist for NOAA." He informed Mr. McLean, adding that a new chief scientist had already been appointed, quote unquote, "Thank you for your service." Now, it was not the first time NOAA had drawn the administration's attention. Last year, the agency's weather forecasters came under pressure for contradicting Mr. Trump's false statements about the path of Hurricane Dorian. So, Tim, if I can have that figure, please.
Yes. Oh. Sorry, Brad, I forgot to open that up.
All right. We can all get our Sharpies ready while Tim's getting that drawn up here.
Well, now okay. Oh shoot, Brad, I can't find where I put it. I thought
No,
I had
that's all right. I think everyone could kind of remember that figure where the hurricane is heading for the Gulf Coast, and it's going to head inland much sooner than Trump had predicted. Now, what Trump is doing predicting the paths of hurricanes, I have no idea. I guess maybe it's because of the amount of wind coming from the White House. But anyway, Trump took out his Sharpie and drew an extra line on the map showing where the path of the hurricane is supposed to go. And then that was the figure I was going to show. But that's all right, Tim. Don't worry about it. But in an administration.
No, keep looking for it. Keep looking
I'm
for
still
it.
looking. I'm still
Keep
looking.
looking for it.
Find it. We can put it up while I'm
Yeah.
talking. That's fine.
You keep looking for it. Okay.
But in an administration where even uttering the words climate change is dangerous, NOAA has so far remained remarkably independent in its ability to conduct research about and publicly discuss changes to the Earth's climate. It also still maintains numerous public websites that declare in direct opposition to Mr. Trump that climate change is occurring, is overwhelmingly caused by humans, and presents a serious threat to the United States. Replacing Mr. McLean, who remains at the agency, was Ryan Mao, a former researcher for the Libertarian Cato Institute, who has criticized climate scientists for what he has called unnecessarily dire predictions. Dr. Mao, a research meteorologist, and Dr. Noble were joined at NOAA by David Legates, a professor at the University of Delaware's Geography Department, who has questioned human-caused global warming. Dr. Legates was appointed to the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary, a role that did not previously exist. So to the left of the white line there, you can see the Sharpie mark that Trump drew in, indicating the new path of Hurricane Dorian. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he didn't actually scribble out the white line first. You know.
Oh,
Now, Neil Jacobs, the NOAA administrator, was not involved in the hirings, according to two people familiar with the selection process. The agency did not respond to requests for comment and a request to make the new officials available for an interview. NOAA officials have tried to get information about what role the new political staff members would play and what their objectives might be, with little success. According to people close to the administration who have questioned climate science, though, their primary goal is to undercut the National Climate Assessment. And of course, that was a report put together, clearly showing the role of fossil fuels in climate change. Now, the assessment, a report from 13 federal agencies and outside scientists led by NOAA, which the government is required by law to produce every 4 years, is the premier American contribution to knowledge about climate risks and serves as the foundation for federal regulations to combat global warming. The latest report in 2018 found that climate change poses an imminent and dire threat to the United States and its economy. The real issue at play is the National Climate Assessment, said Judith Curry, a former chairwoman at the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the Georgia Institute of Technology, who said she has been in contact with Dr. Mao, the new chief scientist. That's what the powers that be are trying to influence. In addition to Dr. Curry, the strategy was described by Myron Ebel, a director at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and a former member of Mr. Trump's transition team, and John Christie, a professor of atmospheric science at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Dr. Christie, a critic of past national climate assessments, said he was asked by the White House this summer to take on the senior role at NOAA, according to E&E News, but declined the offer. He said he understood the role to include changing the agency's approach to the climate assessment. So good for him for refusing that. Ms. Curry and the others said that if Mr. Trump wins re-election, and again, we no longer have to worry about that, further changes at NOAA would include removing longtime authors of the climate assessment and adding new ones who challenge the degree to which warming is occurring, the extent to which it is caused by human activities, and the danger it poses to human health, national security, and the economy. A biased or diminished climate assessment would have wide-ranging implications. For example, it could be used in court to bolster the positions of fossil fuel companies being sued for climate damages. It could counter congressional efforts to reduce carbon emissions, and it ultimately could weaken what is known as the endangerment finding, A 2009 scientific finding by the EPA that said greenhouse gases endanger public health and thus oblige the federal government to regulate carbon dioxide emissions under the Clean Air Act. Other changes could include shifting NOAA funding to researchers who reject the established scientific consensus on climate change and eliminating the use of certain scientific models that project dire consequences for the planet if countries do little to reduce carbon dioxide pollution. Dr. Noble, the new chief of staff, has already pushed to install a new layer of scrutiny on grants that NOAA awards for climate research, according to people familiar with those discussions. Meaningfully changing the National Climate Assessment's findings would be hard to accomplish, according to Brenda Eckwurzel, Director of Climate Science for the Union of Concerned Scientists and co-author of a chapter in the latest edition of the report. Still, Dr. Eckwurzel said NOAA's leading role leading the report is vital, and added that any attempt to undermine climate research for political purposes would threaten public safety and economic growth. Quote, "You need to have a well-functioning scientific enterprise," she said. "The more we back away from that, the more we erode our democracy." Most of the changes at NOAA could be reversed by the next president, thank goodness, officials say, making next week's election a referendum on the future of the agency. The dissonance between NOAA's work and Mr. Trump's dismissiveness toward climate change became clear at the end of 2018 with the publication of the latest installment of the National Climate Assessment. The report put Mr. Trump in the awkward position of disavowing the findings of his own government. "I don't believe it," the president said of the economic assessment in the report. So what always gets me, and I keep wondering why we haven't heard a louder voice from insurance companies on this issue. Because after all, where do people prefer to live? They prefer to live on the coast, and the coasts are what get pounded by these just enormous storms we have anymore now. They're obviously subject to flooding, all of this stuff. I can't imagine that insurance companies are liking the literally billions, if not trillions of dollars now in payouts from damages from these storms that they've had to suffer through. So that's my report, guys. So what are your thoughts?
And that's a good point about the insurance companies. And it's not just, I mean, we're going to see the just violent storms in general increasing. So, even in our area, tornadoes and torrential rains and those types of things, which obviously don't cause a large scale damage as a hurricane, things like that do. But still, if you're having more intense storms, more storms occurring more often, again, damages are going to be done. And that was a good point, Dr. Brad, about insurance companies wanting to get on
Probably
board.
making it up somewhere. Premiums are going up for everybody, probably.
Sure, but at some point, I mean, here's the interesting aspect. There's obviously two components. If you just want to break it down as simply as you can, there's two components to running a business, right? Income and expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, that's as simple as you can make running a business, correct?
Yeah.
Right.
So expenses have to involve insurance, and so I would think every good Republican out there would want to be able to cut business expenses. And yet this is going to be the largest expense for any business will be insurance. So are you listening, guys? If we have any Republican viewers, we probably don't. But anyway, that's as basic as I can think of to put a business. If that becomes your largest expense, what do you want to do? You want to cut it. So what are the alternatives? Either take a risk and don't insure, and good luck getting a mortgage on something if you don't.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Or move. Yeah, so the coastal regions will be more boarded up than they are when an oncoming hurricane is approaching. So.
Mhm.
Well, won't eventually, with the rising ocean levels, the state of Florida is in trouble, right?
Yeah.
You have a whole state.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, back when I really hated the Miami Hurricanes football team, I was for global warming. But, now I kind of put that aside since I don't have any hope of playing them anytime soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We'll I think we'll get back on track now with the new administration. So
yeah. Let's hope so. Let's hope so. All right. I think we'll leave that discussion there, and we'll be right back with our crazy story of the week.
I'm feeling so hollow. Don't you know? And don't you know? I'm living in shadow. Don't you know? And don't you know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? And you were fool's gold. Yes, I did.
And we're back with our crazy story of the week. Well, Halloween was just a little over a week ago, but perhaps some people just cannot get enough of that pseudo holiday. Our crazy story this week comes from the Pathos blog site, The Friendly Atheist, and was authored by Beth Stoneburner. The title of the article is Christian Preacher, Satan is using Kamala Harris to take Trump out. So now we know the real reason why Trump has lost the election, everyone.
Woo!
Hail Satan.
Yes.
Hail Satan.
Now, rather than intelligently pointing out specific policy differences that he has with Democrats, Trump cultist and right-wing preacher Lance Wallnau insisted on Facebook 2 Fridays ago that Kamala Harris is being used by Satan to take out Donald Trump. Obviously. Wallnau asserted that Harris is not intelligent, but simply possesses an ability to deceive people, which is why she was chosen to serve as Joe Biden's running mate by, get this, the deep state, and do what Barack Obama wants her to do, which is to undo Trump's legacy. Now, somehow, all of that reasoning seems to be exactly backwards.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, he added that Harris is driven by a Jezebel spirit. which some evangelicals believe is an evil and cunning demonic female spirit intent on attacking God and those who worship him.
It's me. It's me.
A preacher calling a woman Jezebel is like Trump calling her nasty. It should be interpreted.
Nasty. Hashtag nasty woman.
It should be interpreted as a badge of honor. The not intelligent remark is especially absurd. Harris is the daughter of two immigrants with PhDs, graduated from law school, got elected to statewide posts, and is now the vice president-elect. Disagree with her policies all you want. Plenty of progressive Democrats are right there with you. But demeaning her intelligence is downright childish. Wallnow went on to explain a dream he had, which confirmed how Harris is a tool of the devil. I mean, how else would you get it?
Oh.
The only base that Donald Trump has are the people that are sane. But how many sane people do you know Wallnow has? Before recounting a prophetic dream in which it was supposedly revealed to him that Harris is a tool of the devil. Quote, my biggest concern all along was this dream that I had. I was in an elevator with her, and I was in an elevator going up, and I knew there was a Jezebel spirit. This was before she ran for the primaries for president, so I knew all along that she was going to be the one that the devil is going to try to use to take Trump out.
Obvious. Yeah.
Of course.
We're going, quote, we're going to fight in the spirit, and we're going to mobilize in other ways in order to do what has to be done to keep the devil from his impatient, lusting, grasping, premature seizure of power, Wallnow declared. I'm telling you, Kamala is Hillary 2.0. It's the Jezebel spirit 2.0, and she has no real conscience. And let's put this into perspective. Wallnow isn't afraid of Satan. He's afraid of ambition, perseverance, and confidence. Smart, competent people and the voters who support them are the real threat to the Trump regime and people like Preacher Wallnow. But sure, blame Trump's potential defeat on Satan. Insults are the only language his supporters understand. Well, guys, what do you think about our crazy story?
Well, I guess it's obvious. I can't believe more people didn't see that coming. But obviously, she's working with the devil hand in hand, and she's trying to. Well, I guess she did it. She got rid of Trump. So
Sure, it happened.
It's all self-fulfilling.
Like in that song, "Living in an Elevator." Living up when I'm going down.
Yeah,
Living in an elevator.
I wonder what medication he's on or how much he's drinking to have these visions. I just
I want some of that.
yeah.
and I don't think he's in a state where there are edibles. So
Or is it that is it that he's just infatuated with her? He's thinking about her all the time, and so now she's showing up in his dreams.
Well, what I'm wondering is, all those little girls that dressed up like Kamala for Halloween this year, are they actually devils now, or what?
The minions.
Exactly.
I'm sitting here looking at that naked baby behind you.
Oh.
Well, he's not. I gotta go. Let's see. I gotta.
Does he have a diaper? Okay. I feel a little bit better now. I've been distracted the whole show.
But I think that diaper needs changed. because
Yep,
it's all-
Full of shit.
Yeah, it is. That is
yep,
time to load.
like I told our morning coffee group one day, if we gave Trump an enema, we could bury him in a matchbox.
Ah,
Oh, man. It's,
So anyway, I guess on that note, that'll wrap us up for this week. If you've enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page. Remember, there's a big difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Tracy and Tim saying so long.
goodbye.